Welcome to my podcast. This is my first ever podcast. If you know me, you'd be so shocked to see I'm doing a podcast because I'm one of the shyest people ever. But here I am. And the reason I'm doing this podcast is because I want to touch on some heavy topics in education. And because of that, I would recommend this episode for any educators or any future educators just wanting to get some more valuable information, and also just anyone who wants to gain a better understanding of critical issues that are happening in our education system today. And so, since this is the first episode, I think it would be valuable to share a little bit of information about myself, because I think you guys will gain a better understanding as to why I am so passionate about equitable education and advocating for students who have been overlooked in our education system. And so, to start, my mother immigrated here from Mexico, and so growing up in a bilingual household, I was able to see like firsthand how immigration and language can restrict somebody's access to opportunities in this country. And secondly, for work, I work at a local nonprofit that runs after school programs for mainly marginalized students, a lot of Latino kids. And, I through talking with them every day, I've learned so much about their experiences in the education system today and how that can affect their sense of belonging and their sense of safety in the community. And lastly, I want to mention that I am a first-gen student. I just graduated with my bachelor's in education from University of Washington, and I am now currently pursuing my master's in education at University of Washington. And so, being a first-gen student, I was able to see the challenges that come with that, and it has really shaped why I am so passionate about equitable education. And so, yeah, enough about me, and let's get into the topics. The most critical issue in education today is language and immigration, and the policies surrounding language and immigration are limiting equitable education to multilingual students and immigration students. And these policies are creating barriers to education by limiting access to language support, creating fear through immigration policies, and creating an environment where students' cultures, knowledge, language, identities are not being valued or recognized. And so this issue is having a direct effect on immigrant students, students that come from families that immigrated here, multilingual students, and also students where their first language was not English. Not only is this affecting students, but it also affects schools and educators that are faced with navigating these oppressive systems to help their students. And this issue matters because every student deserves an equitable education, regardless of their race, gender, disability, language, class, wealth, citizenship, and they all deserve an education that meets them right where they're at to better support them. And if we do not address this issue and act on it, we will see higher dropout rates, lack of participation, lack of sense of belonging, lack of sense of safety in schools, higher prison pipelines, the silencing of students' cultures, and the oppression of immigrant students. So, to really understand the issue of language in education, we have to look at the larger systems that shape education. Um, Peter McLaren, who is a critical pedagogy scholar, explains that schools are not neutral spaces. They are shaped by historical, political, cultural, and economic forces that influence whose knowledge is valued and who has access to educational opportunities. So I'm just going to take a deeper dive into the historical, political, cultural, and economic forces, and specifically how that affects language and immigration. Um, Historically, there has been a long history of immigration policy in the United States that has continued conversation about who deserves access to education. Schools were often designed to assimilate immigrant students into the dominant culture, and in many cases, students were expected to abandon their home languages and cultural identities in order to conform to the dominant norms, which were rooted in white, Eurocentric, English speaking cultural standards. Moving to a more political lens, there was one very important legal decision that shaped education for immigrant students, which is the Plyler v. Doe. This Supreme Court ruling basically established that states cannot deny undocumented children access to free public K through 12 education. This case does protect immigrant students' right to attend school. However, there is still political debates about immigration policy, and it will continue to shape how safe families feel accessing education. And kind of still while we're on the topic of things happening politically, I just want to mention some policies that are being brought up to this day that are denying immigration and multilingual students the right to an education. And I'll just briefly talk about these and then we'll move on. But first, we have two bills that are trying to be passed in Tennessee. House Bill 793 and Senate Bill 836, that if these bills are passed would deny access to public schools based on their immigration status, which is just taking away students' freedom to learn and their right to education. There is another proposed bill in Florida State, Senate Bill 1052, that would ban undocumented students from higher education, again, taking away their right to an education. These are very real issues and very real bills that show that these students are under direct attack from this current administration. Moving on to looking at this issue through a cultural lens, which is going to relate very closely to historical, but over time, these historical systems have shaped cultural beliefs that English should be the dominant language in education, and it's made us question about immigrant and bilingual education, and it makes people feel uncomfortable because it deviates from what the dominant culture is, which is white, English-speaking, Eurocentric culture. Lastly, when we look at this through an economic lens, we see that the government can manipulate funding for schools, and these funding decisions can affect whether schools provide resources such as bilingual education programs, language support services, or culturally responsive learning environments. In some cases, political decisions around funding can either support or limit schools' ability to provide equitable education for immigrant and multilingual students. In this current administration, we are seeing funding being heavily cut from education, which is affecting access to these programs that are supporting marginalized students. Okay, so now comes the time to start to think about what are possible solutions, and not just solutions that feel like a band-aid over the issue, but solutions that solve the problem at the roots. The solutions that target these oppressive systems directly. Like Peter McLaren, Paulo Freire agrees that education is not neutral and it either challenges systems of oppression or reinforces them. And if you guys haven't read this book, you absolutely need to. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. He talks about his ideas of critical pedagogy, which essentially is used to fight against oppression through things that he has termed like true dialogue, rejecting the banking model of teaching, and developing a critical consciousness. And all of these ideas can be applied to schools to better support immigrant and multilingual students. Firstly, schools can transform their curriculum from what they are currently using, which is the banking model of education, and start using problem-posing education. The banking model of education just basically means teachers simply talking at the students and depositing knowledge into them rather than engaging them in meaningful conversation, dialogue. And in these types of classrooms, students' experiences, cultures, and perspectives are often ignored, which can leave students feeling like they don't belong and they are not valued. And Freire believed that this model of education creates students who simply follow instructions rather than questioning the systems around them. And so to fight back against this, he mentions true dialogue, which I believe is very important to implement in classrooms. But through true dialogue, which is dialogue that is rooted in the commitment to the humanity of others and is very deeply rooted in love. In true dialogue, students are able to share their experiences, develop their own voices, and build what Freire calls critical consciousness, which is the ability to recognize and question the systems shaping their lives. And so when students develop critical consciousness, they begin to see that many of the challenges they face are not simply individual problems, but are connected to larger social, political, historical, economic structures. And Freire believed that education should empower students to move from simply accepting the world as it is to imagining how it could be different. And in this way, critical consciousness becomes a tool for fighting oppression because it helps students question injustice, speak up about their experiences, and work collectively to create more equitable systems. So to kind of recap the solutions I'm suggesting and what Freire suggests, and it's important that schools take action and move away from banking models of education and move more towards problem-posing education models. And through this model, education can become a space where students feel seen, empowered, and able to participate fully in their learning and in their communities. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I hope to see you guys soon.